Well, thank you, and good morning. It's just great to be in the house. This is a generous church, and it's a beautiful thing to be with you here this morning. We're closing out this short series, which we've had 5, and this is the last in that series, and we're speaking on generosity. It's the last one as we close it out, and I just want to read a short passage to you from the book of Mark, Gospel of Mark, chapter 14. It's a beautiful story, and let me just read it. While he was in Bethany, there's Jesus reclining at the table in the home of Simon the leper. A woman, Mary, came with an alabaster jar of very expensive perfume made of pure nard. She came and she poured the perfume on Jesus' head. Some of those present said indignantly to one another, well, why waste this perfume? It could have been sold for more than a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And they rebuked her harshly. Leave her alone, said Jesus. Why are you bothering her? She has done a beautiful thing to me. The poor you will always have with you, and you can help them when you want, but you're not always going to have me. She did what she could. She poured her perfume over my body to anoint me before my burial. Truly, I say to you, whenever the gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. It will be told in memory of her. Well, I want to talk about this topic of generosity, and I want to set the scene by telling you the story of Babettes Feast. Babettes Feast. It's set about 150 years ago in Denmark, and it's a beautiful story, and I really want you to listen to the detail, take it all in, think about it, because it has so much to teach us about this topic of generosity, reckless generosity, you might call it. So it's 1871, and there's a few houses in a little village in the west of Denmark. There's a little bit of smoke rising out of the chimneys, and there's a very small group of people who live there. There's about 12, 13 of them. They're tired, they're old, they eat the same food every day, just some light fish, and they're pretty joyless. I mean, they're very religious, so they all belong to a little Lutheran sect that was set up many years before, actually 40, 50 years before, by a Lutheran pastor who had died, and his daughters are running the whole thing now. But the basic punchline is that they are tired and they're old and they're joyless, but they're very religious, and they have their Bible studies every day and they sing their songs. But really, if you were to go there, these are people who they're not happy. They're tired of life. It's a tired place. And then one night, there's a ferocious storm. This is a storm like none of them have ever seen. It's incredible. It's just the rain is lashing down, and there's a knock at the door of the sisters who live together in a little house. When they open the door, standing outside in the pouring rain streaming off her face, is a woman who's pleading for shelter. And they bring her in, and she says, my name is Babette, and I just arrived from France. My husband was involved in an uprising. He's in jail, and I'm running for my life. And I was told that you might be able to take me in here. Someone said that you're good people, you might take me in. Well, they say to her, we can't really take you in. I mean, we're not set up for that. But we'll give you a bed for the night, and you're going to have to go in the morning. She says, no, please, I'll do anything. I'll be your servant. I can cook, so I'll cook for you. And they eventually agree, and they take her in, and she's their servant. She becomes their servant, and she brings them good food. She's a good cook. And every day, pretty much, she cooks for them over the next 14 years, brings them tea and biscuits at their Bible study, makes them food in their homes. And so it goes, and her name is Babette. And then one day, after 14 long years, she gets a letter in the post from someone in France, a friend of hers who had been renewing a lottery ticket every year. And the number never came up, but this day, it came up. And she's won an incredible amount of money, 10,000 French francs. I mean, it's insane. It's a huge amount of money. Even today, you say 10,000 French francs, but 150 years ago, this was a number no one could dream of. This was life-changing. I mean, this was enough for her to go back to France and set herself up and be a rich woman. And so the villagers all, I mean, they're not a happy bunch particularly, but they say, well done. They don't really crack a smile about it. They say, I guess you'll be going back now to France. And she says, well, what I'd like to do is cook you a meal. Just to say thank you because you've been very generous to me. I mean, they hadn't been that great to her, to be honest with you. Not really. But for 14 years, they let her stay there. She says, I'd love to cook you a meal. And they say, okay, that's fine. You can do that. And it's also 100 years since the whole group was set up. The sect had been set up. And so it's a celebration. It's a centenary thing. And they weren't planning to celebrate it. But she says, I'll cook you a meal. And it'll be in 8 weeks' time. And the villagers all say, yeah, okay, cool. That sounds good. And then over the next 8 weeks, all these ingredients start to arrive. There's lobster, and there's caviar, and there's some doves, and there's some quails, and then there's an enormous turtle. Nobody knows what the turtle's for, but that arrives as well. There's all these ingredients arriving for this meal, and the villagers begin to realize this isn't going to be any normal meal. This is going to be something pretty spectacular, and they're not very comfortable with that, because they say, well, this could be the sin of gluttony. And so we're really not too sure we're going to, we're really not a good thing for us to be enjoying ourselves at this meal. And so what they do is they make this agreement. They say, well, between themselves, we'll go to the meal because Babette has cooked it. But we're not going to show any pleasure. We're not going to show any gratitude. We might say thank you at the end, but we'll leave early and we'll just go to bed because she has put a lot of time and effort into it. And so that's the big plan. And then on the day of the meal, there's a French general who happens to be visiting. And they invite him to the feast as well. And so the feast kicks off. And what a feast. No one's seen anything like this in all their lives. I mean, there's a starter, there's a main course, there's dessert, there's everything in between. I mean, it's an extraordinary. The wines are unbelievable. And the French general, they say nothing, the villagers, by the way, but the French general, he begins to talk about it. And he says to the villagers, I mean, this is incredible. Who made this meal? I've never eaten anything like this. Well, maybe once. He says, I've eaten around the world. I've eaten everywhere. I've never eaten food like this. Have you eaten? And the villagers, they don't really appreciate it. They don't know what they're eating. Not really. But he says, I've eaten a meal like this once in my life. Many, many years ago at the Café Anglais in Paris. But how would you have a meal like that here? Doesn't make any sense. I don't understand that. And who made it? They say, well, our servant made it, Babette. He says, Babette, your servant made this? How? This is incredible. Anyway, the meal goes on. And as the meal goes on, there's something interesting that happens, something magical. As they eat and as they drink, slowly there is a redeeming of the human spirit. They start to laugh. They start to enjoy life again. They smile for the first time. Someone even puts his arm around someone else and just says, we really need to do this sort of thing more often. I haven't laughed in ages. And this goes on until 1 in the morning. They never stay up till 1 in the morning. I mean, here they all are, and they're enjoying themselves. And there is, if you like, what in Jewish culture is called the Simha, S-I-M-C-H-A, and it's pronounced Simha. And it's essentially what we have here. It's a sharing of joy. And it's an incredibly powerful thing. When we were singing Hosanna just now, that was the Simha that we all felt. And they felt that. They felt that in this village, the Simha. And somehow there was this joy, and suddenly they started singing a hymn, and suddenly it all came to life. And then at the end of the evening, they all walked out into the night and went home. And the two sisters then said to Babette, how did you cook that meal? I mean, that was extraordinary. That was incredible. We knew you could cook, but we had no idea you could cook like that. I mean, how did you do that? And Babette said, well, I used to be the head chef at the Café Anglais. People came from around the world to eat my food. I just cooked you my favorite meal. I was the head chef at the Café Anglais. And they say, well, Babette, we had no idea. I mean, we didn't realize that we had no idea. We knew you could cook, but nothing like that. Of course, they'd never asked her. And then they say, it's such a shame that you're leaving us. I mean, just as we feel like we're getting to know you, and just as everybody is starting to interact with each other, now you're going to leave. What a shame. And Babette says, actually, I'm not going anywhere. I'm going to stay. I'm going to stay here. I'll just carry on. I'll carry on working for you. It's fine. And they say, but no, you won 10,000 francs. I mean, surely this is your ticket, your lottery ticket out of here. She says, well, I don't have that money. It's gone. It's gone. They said, what do you mean it's gone? Where's it gone? She says, well, I spent it. On what, Babette? What did you spend it on? She says, well, on the meal. A meal like that at the Café Anglais cost 10,000 francs. I spent it all on you. I spent it. That's where it went. And it's just a beautiful story. I love that story. First time I heard it, I just felt the emotion welling up in me. You know, these are people who didn't appreciate it. They didn't deserve it. And yet, Babette spent it on them. They hadn't actually treated her that well, but it's a beautiful, beautiful story. And the reason it resonates with all of us, the reason we love to hear that story is because we know, don't we, that we would never have done that. There's no chance, right? This is your ticket out. This is your lottery ticket out. This is your once-in-a-lifetime way out to go back to the Café Anglais, to go back to Paris. There's no way we're going to be doing that. I mean, we're wired, are we not, to look after ourselves. You see it from a small child. And you take imagine a 2-year-old, 3-year-old. You give them a bag of Maltesers. You say this for you. The child hasn't done anything to deserve it, but they grab the bag and it's all good. And they're popping them in their mouth. And then you say, oh, you share it with your brother. And the kid looks at you like, seriously? So yeah, just as your brother. So the child takes one and gives it to the brother with a look that says, dude, I'm only doing this because they got a gun to my head. You're not getting any more of this. No child, age 2, is going to hand the whole bag across to his brother. Right? He doesn't. We're wired to keep the bag of Maltesers for ourselves, and maybe we give away one. And even as we get older, it's the same, right? You go to a restaurant, 6 of you, and at the end of it comes time to pay the bill. And one person says, I got this, get the phone out, divide everything, bill by 6. You're like, hang on, you guys all had the Pullini Montrachet 65 per bottle of wine. I had tap water. I didn't have a starter. You guys had the lobster linguine. You want to charge me £43? No, I'm on £28. You don't say that, of course, right? Because you don't want to be a cheapskate. But the truth is, you're thinking about it all the way home. Like, these are supposed to be my friends. They robbed me £7. We're wired that way, people. That's what we're like, right? Babette is the opposite. Babette says, here's 10,000 francs, and she spends the whole lot. It's her ticket out, right? She couldn't spare it, the whole lot. It's all gone. It's all gone. I mean, you don't see generosity like that. And there's a story in the New Testament, we just read it, about Mary. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. The story of Mary. She has this alabaster box of very expensive, we're told. Not just expensive, but it's supremely expensive perfume, the equivalent of gold back then. We don't know how she came across it, but this is, if you like, her pension. This is it. It's a year's wages. I mean, she was not a wealthy woman. She came from quite a dubious background. We're told in the various accounts. This story comes in all the Gospels, and we're told that she comes from quite a challenged background. The general consensus is that she was a sex worker, or had been in a previous life. But she has this alabaster box, and she brings it into this room, Simon the leper, and everybody's there. They're reclining. It's an afternoon. She walks in with this box, and everyone knows what's in the box, right? Because they recognize it as an alabaster box. What's she going to do with it? What's Mary going to do? She's not really supposed to be there, by the way, because they don't have time for people like her. But she's a friend of Jesus, so they tolerate her. And she brings in this box, and then she breaks it apart. And this is a one-time thing. You can't put it back together. And she takes the perfume, and then she very carefully, she pours it over Jesus. And this aroma fills the room. I mean, you smell the oud, the Moroccan oud, and you smell the nard, and you smell just all the spices, and the perfume is just rising in the air. Everyone can smell it. It's an incredible, incredible scene. And it's a one-time thing, and it's gone now. Just like Babette's 10,000 francs, in a moment of reckless generosity, it's all gone. You don't see that attitude, do you? We live in a time now of, it's always been that way, where we look after ourselves. We're wired that way, like we said. Even when it comes to generosity, when it comes to giving, we've really got to do the maths and calculate it, and we keep most of it for ourselves if we possibly can. And then we give away just a little bit, But you see, reckless generosity, giving until it hurts, literally giving until it hurts, that's the thing. It's what you saw with Babette. It's what you saw with Mary, and it's an incredible thing when you see it. When you hear about it, it holds you spellbound. You sit in your seat, and you're on the edge of your seat, because it's an incredible, incredible thing. And gratitude, you see, is the mother of generosity. Gratitude is the mother. I could have said the father of generosity, but these are women we're talking about here, the ones who showed up. The guys were the ones who were disgracing themselves by giving Mary a hard time. There's no room for the guys here. This is all about the women. So we're talking about the mother of generosity is gratitude. And if you maybe ask yourself, why why did Mary do what she did? And why would she have done that? Well, she had a backstory, like I said. She came from a dubious past in prostitution, and she had a very challenging life. She was down and out. She was a disgrace in that society. No one had any time for her. She was not supposed to be there. They literally just tolerated her being in the room. There was a time, she was never going to get married. There was a time when she thought it was all over and done. And then she met Jesus of Nazareth, and he turned her life around. You remember we read in Joel about the years the locusts have eaten. Remember, how it used to be in those days that you're a farmer, you'd plant everything, you'd put everything into it, and now the crop would come up, and this was it. This would be your livelihood that was going to sustain you for the next year, 2, 3 years even. And then suddenly, at one day, there's a clear blue sky, and then it just gets darker. You think, is it rain? And then you realize it's not rain. It's too dark. It's too black. And suddenly, upon you are billions and billions of locusts, and gone in a night. It's all gone. All your hopes, all your dreams, your future, your children's dreams, everything gone as the locusts come in. And that was a regular thing that would happen. It still happens in parts of the global south. And God says, I will restore the years that the locusts have eaten. I will restore those years, and I will give them back. Years that you thought you'd never get back. And that's what had happened for Mary, you see. And she's so grateful. And so she's sitting in her room trying to think to herself, what can I do to express my gratitude to Jesus? And then she thinks, this is it. She sees the box on her table. Probably she has a very small room, but she has the box. And this is what was going to sustain her in old age. But she says, I'm going to take it, and I'm going to make this public display of just my love for him, what he's done for me, and I'm just going to say thank you to him. And this is just going to be a one-time thing. And so she doesn't. But the men pick on her, and they basically say, what are you doing? What about the poor? You could have given this to the poor. They get all self-righteous about it. And Jesus says, you're not really thinking about the poor. The poor are always here. You can look after the poor anytime you want, but what she's done is incredible. And as the smell of the perfume rises in the room, and as the men are beating up on her, just her emotion, Mary's emotion just wells up, and she starts to cry, and she has tears flooding down her face and onto Jesus' feet. And she's just curled up in a ball at his feet. And as her tears flood down her face onto his feet, and dirt just pours from his feet, and the men are like, look what you're doing. And she in her awkwardness and in her humiliation, she starts to dry his feet with her hair. She has long, thick hair, and she starts to dry his feet. And Jesus says to the men, he says, leave her alone, back off, stop. What she's done is an amazing thing. Simon, we're told in Luke's version of this, Simon, I came to your house. You didn't give me any water for my feet. You didn't give me a towel, but now she has washed my feet with her tears, and she's dried my feet with her hair. What she's done is incredible, and she will always be remembered. You guys, no one's ever going to remember you. That was Mary's story, my friends. The story of intense gratitude, and it led to generosity. I have a couple of very dear friends, both with cancer right now. One of them's in a hospice in Scotland. He's very ill, and he's at the end of his journey. He's not even 50. I've known him very well for many, many years. It's heartbreaking to see what he's going through. And I have another friend here in London. Also, he's 49 years old, diagnosed with cancer. He's going through chemo at the moment. I saw him a few days ago, and chemo is a brutal thing. Just really difficult to just see what he's going through. And I walked away from seeing him, and I sat on a park bench, and I looked up at the sky, which is blue and bright, and I looked at the flowers, and I just was overwhelmed with a sense of gratitude, because I too had cancer. I think I've told you before, when I was in 2019, so coming up to 4 years ago. And that could have been my story, to be honest with you. I mean, could have been, should have been maybe, but it wasn't. And I recovered, and I'm so profoundly grateful. My sense of gratitude has no bounds. And I want to just ask you, my friend, are you grateful? We read in Psalm 16. This is a beautiful verse. I don't know if you know this, but this verse, the lines, says the psalmist, the lines have fallen to me in pleasant places. The lines of my life, the channel that I move in, it's pleasant on the left and on the right. In the middle, they've fallen to me in pleasant places. When I look at the other 99% of the world, the global south, I mean, you can't compare. Well, I like the fact we can sit here and that we can sing, and that we can enjoy the Simha together. The fact that you have an income, the income might not be maybe necessarily exactly where you want it to be. It could always be a little bit more, but you have an income. You have your health. You can be here. You have security. You know you're not going to get. You're not going to walk out of here and walk into some critical situation. This is a country that it values life. I was just reading a couple of days ago, a young guy tragically he collapsed and died in the Strand in London. They shut the whole Strand. I mean, for like several hours to try to work out what had happened. They mapped the whole thing. Some countries in the world, you die on the street. You just die in the street. The cars just get on and shut the road. What are you talking about? So this country, in many ways, is it's a great place to live. Many people want to come live here. The line, it's not perfect, of course, we all know that. But the lines have fallen to us in pleasant places. We have so much to be thankful for. We look out of the window sometimes, we say, oh, it's raining again. When is it going to stop raining? Guys, this is not something there's neither here nor there. In the overall scheme of things, the lines have fallen to us in pleasant places. We have so much to be grateful for. You know, when I was growing up in Accra, we used to sing this song. Every Sunday, it felt like to me, count your blessings. Name them. One by one, and it will surprise you. It will blow your mind what the Lord has done. That's the truth of it. But name them one by one. When you go home today, write them down on a piece of paper. Not you think about it. Name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. And I tell you this, you know, when you give, and you give recklessly, as it were, like Babette, when you look at it, you're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. Why would someone do that? I mean, why would you do that when you could have got out of there and gone back to the Café Anglais? Why would you do that? Or Mary, why? This is your perfume. Like, why? This is a one-time. How could you have done that? This one-time thing. Wasted it almost. It's extravagant. How could you have done that? When you ask yourself that question, you know, when that happens and you see that happen, well, it blesses you. You know, I don't know whether you ever did this when you were a kid. I can remember back, you know, sometimes you'd be somewhere and there might be like a swimming pool, or there'd be like a lake or there's something, and someone would throw in some like a 50p piece or something, and you had to try to dive down to get it. And, you know, I wasn't a great swimmer, but I could just about hold my breath and get down the bottom of the pool. But this thing was not easy to do. You know, you'd go in and you'd just feel your lungs bursting as you try to go down and retrieve the 50p piece. First time you go down, you miss it, but you're running out of air. So you come back up, you get more air, you go back down again, and it's a bit of a competition. And eventually you get it and you come up, and that feeling of relief as you come up and you burst out through the water and you get the air back in. And for some of us, that's what it's like to give. You know, in that number that got put up by Pastor Dave earlier, for some people to give, that was not easy. For everybody to give, that's not easy. It was like diving to the bottom of a pool, or you drop something in a river and you have to go down and retrieve it. You have to go deep, dig very, very deep to get it and to retrieve it and to pull it back up. But when you do, and you burst up through the water and you take it to someone, your gift, and you say, this is for you. I thought you could use this. I thought you could use this. Well, that's an incredible thing. I mean, the blessing that you feel, you know, it's twice blessed. Not only the person who receives it is blessed, but you're blessed as well. Shakespeare in Merchant of Venice puts it beautifully. He's talking about mercy, but mercy and generosity, it's the same thing we're talking about. And he says there's a double blessing, and he's saying that mercy or generosity is not constrained. It's not a constrained thing, you know. It's expansive, and it gives to all. He says the quality of mercy is not strained. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. It is, he says, twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. His scepter shows the force of temporal power, the attributes to awe and majesty wherein doth sit the dread and fear of kings. But mercy is above this sceptered sway. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. It is an attribute to God himself. When you give recklessly, my friends, it's twice blessed. You're blessed as well. Your heart brims over. You find your why. You find your sense of purpose. You find what you were put on earth for. Some people say, well, I hear this all the time. What's my purpose? I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know what I'm here for. So many people, don't you find, say, what's my purpose? When you give recklessly like Babette or like Mary, you find your purpose. You find it with an intensity that you can scarcely imagine. If we were able to now have a fireside chat with either Babette or with Mary and say, if you had your chance again, would you have held back the 10,000 francs and gone back to the Café Anglais? Would you have kept that alabaster box and not broken it open in that room that time? Would you have done that? They'd say no, 1,000 times no. Of course not. I would have. Of course not. For sure, I would do it again, because that's where I found my purpose. We're still talking about Mary 2,000 years later. We're talking about Babette 150 years later. It's an incredible thing. It's a beautiful thing. And if you've never tried it, if you've never tried reckless generosity, try it. Try it. It's time. But not only, of course, is the giver blessed, but also the recipient. For someone who is struggling to make the maths work at the end of every month, the numbers just don't work. Maybe you're a single mother, maybe you've got a couple of children, and you're just trying to make it work. And you've been reading about, I don't know if you've been reading about this in the news, people who are struggling to make the numbers. The numbers just don't work. What are you going to do? And then someone comes to you and says, here, I thought you could use this. And they've dug deep for it, but they say, I think you could use this. That's an incredible thing that changes you, right? That's an amazing thing, because why does it change you? Well, it tells you that this person values you. It tells you that you're valued. So many people feel I'm not valued. I count for nothing. Nobody cares. There's no one to speak to. And it shows that you're valued, and it's an incredible thing that you are so you're so blessed. It is a beautiful thing, and it softens you. Babette's guests were softened in a way that they couldn't imagine. Suddenly they realized what it was all about. The hymns that they'd been singing, suddenly they had meaning. You remember in Luke 19, Jesus goes to Jericho, and there's a melee around. Everybody wants to be around Jesus. Everyone wants to be close to Jesus. You remember the story about the woman who just wants to touch the hem of his garment? That's the story of Jesus. Wherever he goes, they don't just want to touch the hem of his garment. That's enough for them. That's all they want. And there's a man in Jericho, and he's called Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus is the chief tax collector. He's super wealthy, and he's not a nice guy. Zacchaeus is not a good guy. He's collaborating with the Romans. He's taxing his own people, which is how the whole setup was. And he always used to charge, an extra bit on top, and he'd scoop a bit off for himself. He had no friends. Zacchinomes, they used to call him. And this guy basically, he wants to see Jesus. And Jesus is in town. And so he's trying to get in amongst the crowd, but he can't get in, and no one's going to let him through because he's Zacchaeus. So you can't see? Oh, shame about that. And so he's going to try to figure out a plan. And he kind of runs ahead, and then he still can't see. He's trying to look over the crowd, and he can't see. And then suddenly there's a tree, and he can figure out in about 30 seconds, Jesus is going to be there. I'm going to climb the tree. And it's a bit undignified. He's got all his stuff, and but he climbs the tree, and Jesus and the crowd approach him. And as they get there, Zacchaeus can see him. He says, that's Jesus. He didn't know what he looked like, of course, because they didn't even invent Facebook, Instagram for another 2,000 years. So he's looking up. And Jesus looks up at Zacchaeus, and he says, and he stops. And of course, everybody stops, and they go quiet. And he says, Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus didn't even know that Jesus knew his name. He says, Zacchaeus, come. He's like, me? Yeah, you, come. And he comes down from the tree, and then you might just imagine the whole thing, right? Something ridiculous. Come down from the tree with all his stuff and his robes, and he's got to climb down. Everybody's watching him. He's got no friends. He's like, oh no, I really didn't mean for this to happen. I just want to climb the tree and see it now. Look, I got to come down. And Jesus says, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house. I want to come to your house this afternoon. I'm going to spend the afternoon with you. Zacchaeus like, me? My house? No one wants to spend time with Zacchaeus. He can't believe it. And Jesus goes to his house. He spends the entire afternoon with him. Whole afternoon. He gives him his time generously, recklessly almost. And at the end of it, Zacchaeus is a changed man. Remember that? And Zacchaeus basically says, you know what? He says, I'm going to give it all back. all the people I've ripped off. He has an Excel spreadsheet. He's got everything. It's all written down. Got the whole works. He knows. He says, I'm going to put a I'm going to put a cell next to all the rip-off column, and I'm going to have times 4. I'm going to put it in there, and I'm going to give everybody back 4 times, not just 1, 2, 3, 4 times what I took from them. I'm going to give it back. And Jesus says, this day salvation has come to this house. And it was time that he gave. You see that? Time. We often think, don't we, when we talk about giving, we're thinking about money and we think about wealth. It's how we kind of think. Someone was generous, you think about that. But actually, it's about time as well, isn't it? For me, actually, I find it probably the hardest thing for me to give is time. I just don't seem to have very much of it. So giving time is a very big deal for me. If I look back over my life, if I'm honest with you, the most impactful things haven't really been financial gifts to me. It's really been people giving me their time. I mean, there has been some financial gifts. I remember when I was very young, I think I was maybe 8 or 9, growing up in Accra, and my mother is English, so he lived here, and so my grandmother was here. And so we didn't get to see her very often, and we didn't have any money to spare. My father was a government doctor, and so he was earning $32 a month. And, sometimes I hear people talking about being on they talk about people who growing up on $1 a day. And the other day I was thinking, yeah, $1 a day, that's not very much. And then it dawned on me, but that's you. We were on $1 a day. The whole family was on $1 a day. $32 a month is $1 a day. We couldn't afford to buy a ticket to get on what was then British Caledonian. Remember any of that? British BCal to come over here. We couldn't afford that. But my uncle Ishmael, he wasn't super wealthy, but he had some money. And he used to dig deep the bottom of that pool. And he used to come up and he used to write a check every few years. And he used to write a check for 5 of us to come over here. It was a beautiful, beautiful man, Uncle Ishmael Kujoji. And he used to do that. But for the most part, if I'm honest with you, it's been about time. It's been about my parents spending time with me, my father spending time with me, explaining how the whole world is put together, how the whole thing works, frameworks and principles for living your life. They say that you are balanced and settled in life if you have a framework for understanding how the world works. Who and what makes it all happen. That there's a spiritual dimension, that whole piece. When you understand how the world is put together, that's part 1. And then part 2, you need to understand your place in that world. And the reason that we have so much trauma and stress and anxiety and mental fragility is most people don't understand. Many people, especially young people, they're looking at people on Instagram and on Facebook, and they don't understand their place. They can't figure it out. They don't understand really how the world works, all this uncertainty, and their own place. How do I fit into all of this? And they can't figure it out. And unsurprisingly, the mental health issues are exploding. And you look at everyone else, and the thing is, everyone else seems to be making it. When you look at everyone else's Insta account, or you look at their Snapchat or TikTok or whatever you're looking at, they seem to have it, but you can't figure it out. And that's the problem. But for me, my father spent a lot of time explaining, son, this is what you need to know. This is how it all works. My mother took time out, she wasn't working because she was bringing us up. And so I spent a lot of time with her, understanding, just as a small child, she's spending time with me, nurturing me, looking after me and my sisters as well. It's time with my mentors, people who've taken time out to spend time. I can't tell you the value of spending time with other people. And, there are people here who would love to have some of your time. You have so much to give, and, they would love to have your time. And as I was just putting this together, I thought, you know what? When you think about spending time with people, it's really about listening to people, actually, a lot of the time. You sit there and you just listen to what it is that they have to say. But by and large, we're not very good at listening. It's still work in progress for me, listening. But I think here's a very helpful framework that I just wanted to share with you. I think it's quite powerful. And it's the idea that when you listen, for the most of us, as we're listening, we're really not really listening. We're just waiting for an opportunity to get in and put our side of the story and just kind of say what we think, not really listening to the other person. But what you should be doing for active listening is, first of all, there's a deep listening. And the deep listening is you are trying to hear what the other person is telling you. Like, they're saying these words to you. What are they trying to get across? What is the message they're trying to get across to you? And you are fully focused on that. So you are looking at them intently. Sometimes when you talk to someone, they're looking around and they're all over the place. You are looking straight down the barrel of the lens, straight into their eyes, and you're saying, what are you trying to tell me? You ask questions. So when you said this, did you mean this? What are you trying to get across? That's deep listening. But then there's also wide listening, which is, this person is telling me this, but then there's all this other information out there. There's a wider context. Why are they telling me what it is they're telling me? When you start to think like that, and you start to listen like that, it's such a powerful thing. And then you show people that you're listening, and then you suspend judgment for the most part. Which, as soon as someone starts, you've got a view. Is that a good idea? Is that a bad idea? Let me tell them what a dumb idea that is, or how I could have had a better idea. You have that. I don't know whether you have. Does that ever happen? Well, yeah, that's not great listening. But you suspend judgment, and finally you come back, with a thoughtful response. And Jesus was very good at doing this. It doesn't matter which conversation you listen into, whether it was with Nicodemus, it comes to him at night, and he comes to find out who Jesus is. And Jesus opens up, and some of the most powerful things that Jesus says, he says in these conversations, is his thoughtful response after he's listened very deeply to Nicodemus. What is Nicodemus really saying? What's he really asking? What is his real need? What's the setup that Nicodemus is operating in? And then finally he says, you need to be born. Let me tell you, you need to be born again. And Nicodemus says, I don't quite understand that. And they have this conversation. It's deep and it's wide. Or when the rich young ruler comes to Jesus and says, I've done it all. I'm pretty cool. I'm all set. Comes up in his Lambo and he's all good. He gets out. He says, okay, so I know you're the master. I know you're the dude. So what do I need to do? Because I do everything. And Jesus says, oh, okay. And he's listening very deeply to this guy and very wide. He's much, much, much more wide than this guy realizes. And then he says to the rich young ruler, okay, here's what you need to do. You need to go and sell everything you got. The Lambo, everything. Sell it. And you're going to give the money to the poor. And we told the man went away deeply sorrowful because he had a whole bunch of stuff. But I think one of the most beautiful places in which this comes out is when Jesus is dealing with the Samaritan woman at the well. You remember that story? It's just a fabulous story. And it's a baking hot day. And Jesus comes to the well and the woman is there. She's not really supposed to be there that time of day. Normally you'd be there in the early morning or you'd be there in the late evening when it's much cooler. But she's an outcast for reasons that will become clear. And so she has to come by herself at midday when it's burning hot. And Jesus is there and he's thirsty. He says, please, can I have something to drink while you're there at the well? And she says, this is a bit odd, you asking me, a Samaritan woman, you being Jewish, asking me for a drink, because we don't get on, the Jews and Samaritans. Jesus says, yeah, well, that's true. By the way, if you knew who I was, you'd ask me for living water, and I would give it to you. And the woman says, oh, okay, well, I'd like some living water, please. I wouldn't have to come here every day. But of course, Jesus is listening very deep to her, and he's listening very wide. He knows all about her, but he's in deep and wide, and he says, we'll get to the living water, but before we do that, can you just maybe go get your husband and bring him here? And the woman says, oh, yeah, I don't have a husband, actually. Jesus says, no, you don't. You've got five. You've had 5 husbands. And then she kind of swerves the whole thing, and she says, our forefathers, our ancestors used to say that we should be praying in this mountain. Some say we should pray in that mountain. Which is the right mountain to pray in? She's trying to get him, desperately trying to get him away as he's listening very deep and wide, and he's figuring out what's happening. And she knows that, and she's trying to swerve away. And she says, they say Messiah is going to come. And then he gives this thoughtful, his incredible response. He says, yes, they do say Messiah is going to come. That's me. And blows her mind. And all the stories with Jesus, these interactions where he's listening, you notice that he's listening very, very deep. And he's listening very, very wide. And he suspends judgment. He doesn't judge this woman. He just says it like it is. There's no judgment. There's no judgment in there. And this business of listening and actively listening is such a powerful thing. As you give your time and you just say to people, what's your story? And you just sit and you listen. And you don't say anything. You just listen back. And it's not just about your time, is it? It's also about your space that you have. Those lines that we talked about that have fallen so pleasantly, those feasts that you have, the banquets that you have in life, the good times that you have, the good things that you do in life, to recklessly share those and be generous with people. Yeah, we live in a city, I think it's at last count something like 8.96 million people, almost 9 million people in London. It's just in London. And most of those people are lonely. If I was to ask you now to put your hand up if you're lonely and you were being honest, a whole bunch of hands would go right up right now. So many lonely people who would love to have someone to speak to. You can be in a room like this and you can experience the Simha, the shared joy, and yet you can go out of here and you're deeply lonely. I was speaking on the phone to someone this morning. She said, I'm so lonely, in her particular situation, just so lonely. So many people lonely. People in even here. Maybe this isn't your culture. This isn't your country. You've arrived here. And, you know, when you arrive in this country and you don't know how it all works, it's kind of hard to figure it out. Not easy. And if no one shows you, you can go years and not figure it out. When I first arrived in this country, I think I was 16, something like that. Yeah, I remember I was holding hands with, in Ghana, you hold hands with a guy, walk down the road, no big deal. You know, I came here, I thought you could do the same thing. I started holding hands with some guy in my school, and the guy's like trying to pull his hand away, and I'm holding his hand, and then he turns to me, and then he says, "You don't mind me asking, are you gay?" And I thought gay meant happy, so I'm like, "Yeah, totally gay, absolutely. How about you?" That's like one of 1,000 different things that I didn't realize when I got here. You can't just go up to a guy and start holding his hand, right? And you know, it just doesn't work like that here. If you don't know this stuff, you got to. And sometimes you have to find this stuff out the hard way. And you know, it's not just people who are in an alien land. It's people who are old. No one ever goes to visit them. People who are sick. No one really goes to visit them. You know, there are a lot of people who are not well, chronically not well, all kinds of issues that they've got. And desperately would love to have some company, would have liked if someone just come by, just swing by. And it costs in your time. You don't have the time to go and spend time with someone who's not well or someone who's old. It costs to do that. Or someone who's in debt. I was reading the other day about how high the levels of debt are, crippling. It just cripples you. You just don't have the money. So what are you going to do? And they would love to be able to speak to someone. My friend, you get to invite people like that and put them on your guest list, as it were. You know, when you're inviting someone for a dinner party, you're looking at who you're going to invite. You get to put them on the guest list. You get to invite them to your banquet. You get to bring them into your home and say, "This is your place." You know, in other cultures, it's much easier sometimes to open your home. Here, in this country, your home is your castle. Everyone is a bit locked up. But you get a chance to open your home to people who would dearly love to. And you know, that person who's right at the end of their tether and just is even wondering if there's any point going on. And you read about this, don't you? You read about people, you read all the time about someone who just took their own life, and you just say, well, no one expected it. You say, well, how did that happen? Well, there's so many people completely at the end of their tethers, at the wit's end, nowhere to turn. And if you step into that situation, sometimes it doesn't cost you very much. It's just a phone call. Or it's just a few pounds out of your bank account that means more to them than it does to you. And then when they're telling their story, they will tell their story and they will say, "I was right at my wit's end. It was all over. I had nowhere to go." And then you stepped in and you changed the game for me. You'll never know what it meant. You stepped in and you changed the game for me. That day back in 2023, May 23, you stepped in, you made that phone call, and it just completely changed the game. You know, what we're really talking about is a concept that I love. It's a concept of grace. Grace. I love it so much. We named our daughter Olivia. Her middle name is Grace. It's just a beautiful. When I even say the word grace, I get emotional. It's just a beautiful concept. Just to explain it, you know, actually there's a book called What's So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey. If you haven't read it, I really urge you to. You know, you can get it on Amazon, you get it anywhere, but it's just a beautiful, and Babette's Feast, the story of Babette's Feast is in there along with some others, but it's just a beautiful collection of observations on this thing, grace. Because, you know, justice is when you get what you deserve. You know that, right? You do the crime and you go to court, or you break the speed limit, you get the fine. That's how it works. Justice. You did this is what follows, just the way it is. Mercy is when you go to court and then the judge says, well, I know you did it. In fact, you've admitted that you did it. Well, I'm going to give you one more chance. One shot. You do it again and you're going inside, but now I'm going to give you one shot. You better hang on to, you better change your life around, but you're getting mercy. That's what mercy looks like. When you don't get what you deserve. But grace. Grace is Babette's Feast. That's when you get what you didn't deserve. That's when the 10,000 francs gets blown on you that you weren't expecting, you didn't really appreciate. That's grace, my friends. And that's what we're dealing with in this whole New Testament, this Bible. It's about grace. This is a God of grace. And maybe this morning you're crushed by life and all that life is throwing at you. So you're here and you're joining in the singing, and no one can tell, no one knows, but actually life is really difficult, and the waves seem to keep coming, and it doesn't feel like you can take any more, but they keep coming. And they come in many different ways. It might be your health, it might be your income, it might be your relationships. There's any number of different ways, but you're crushed by life. And you're exhausted. You're not sleeping properly. You're getting light earlier and earlier. You look at the clock, you think it must be 7, it's only 4 in the morning. How can I? And I'm awake again. I only had 4 hours sleep last night. So many people not sleeping properly, the mental health issues that people have, the fragility and the stress. And all we want is some rest and some peace. Just rest. Just rest. I just want some rest. I just need to rest. I just need to rest. And Jesus says, come to me. All of you who are weary and heavy laden, you're exhausted, and I will give you rest. I will give you rest. Maybe you say, well, I'd love to do that. I'd love to, but you don't know my background. I've got a background. I don't even know why I'm here. I've got a story. I've got a background. It's not good. My friend Mary had a background. The Samaritan woman at the well had a background. Zacchaeus had a background. We've all got a background, my friend. That's why we're here. Jesus said, I didn't come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. That's the whole message. That's the whole reason that we get to be here. It's not about the righteous. It's sinners he's come to call to repentance. It's time, my friends. It's time to be recklessly generous. And if you want peace in your life, you want a new start, if you want to change it up, you're tired of being crushed by life and all that's coming at you. You tried it all and you can't really figure it out. It's time to go to the one who is ultimately generous. It's not about 10,000 francs. It's not about a jar of alabaster, box of ointment and perfume. Gave his life. Gave his whole life, the whole thing. Didn't need to do it, but he did it for you and he did it for me. It's time, my friends. It's time today. Grace, grace, grace.